Hey guys, tonight we are sinking straight into the candlelit, gold-dusted corridors of ancient Egypt, a world where rivers flood and crocodiles lounge, and the very air seems to crackle with secrets. Picture yourself standing on cool limestone floors, hieroglyphs whispering down from the walls, and the distant sound of reed flutes echoing through the night. You're surrounded by shadows taller than you, ancient gods painted with blue skin and the heads of jackals, and oh yes, royalty that would make your own family drama look like a gentle sitcom. You're not just peeking in on any family. Tonight you're joining a family whose traditions would have sent your high school guidance counselor into early retirement. Siblings marrying siblings, not for love or some tragic accident, but because everyone believed that's what the gods themselves expected. This is the land of the Pharaohs, where royal blood is supposedly so divine, so impossibly pure, that only a sister could ever be worthy of a king. If you're the queasy type, well, let's just say you probably won't survive this particular bedtime story without a raised eyebrow or two. So, before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 a.m? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city, eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey. Together, here on Timeless Sleep, you trudge with your bare feet through the sand of memory, entering the royal city of Thebes. The Nile glimmers with moonlight outside, but inside these stone halls, you find a court that does not simply flirt with taboo, it marries it, literally. Picture the famous golden mask of Tutankhamun. Everyone knows the face, but how many remember that Tut's queen, Ankhesenamun, was also his half-sister, and Tut's parents, Akhenaten and possibly Nefertiti or Kia, well, their family tree looks like it was drawn by someone who fell asleep on the job. But let's step back. Why did it all begin? The answer lies with the gods, as so many answers do in Egypt. The pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was Horus on earth, the living son of the sun god Ra, and Ra, as legend has it, set the pattern. His children Isis and Osiris, goddess and god, were siblings who became lovers and rulers together. To the ancient Egyptian mind, it simply made sense. Divine blood should be recycled like that last stubborn bit of toothpaste, never diluted with mere mortals. If you married outside, you risked letting in the ordinary, the flawed, the human, and who wants that? Right, besides everyone except the royal family, apparently. Imagine yourself now as a young royal, eyes ringed with kohl, waiting for the sun to rise above the pylons of Karnak Temple. You're told from birth that you are different, chosen. You play with your siblings not just as brothers and sisters but as future spouses. Maybe you sneak dates under the date palms, or maybe you just rehearse political speeches to the statues of Anubis, knowing your marriage isn't about butterflies in your stomach, but order, power, and the illusion of immortality. Let's zero in on Pharaoh Akhenaten, the heretic king who shattered Egypt's religious traditions and worshipped the sun disk Aten. His most famous wife was Nefertiti, yes, the one with the perfect cheekbones, but ancient records hint that he also married one or even two of his own daughters. If your jaw just dropped, you're in good company. So did the jaws of most Egyptologists before they picked them up and dusted them off. In Akhenaten's wild new religion, the pharaoh and his queen became the new model of the divine pair, meaning any child of theirs, no matter how closely related, was also seen as sacred. You slip down a hallway, torches flickering, and overhear the soft murmur of priests discussing marriage contracts. For ordinary Egyptians, marrying a sibling was a scandalous act. If it happened at all, it was rare and quiet. But if you wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, suddenly, all rules bent to your will. Consider Pharaoh Ramses II, the so-called great ancestor. His daughters appear on his monuments as great royal wives. And lest you think this was only for show, marriage contracts and birth records confirm it. Brother-sister marriages happened, and happened often at the very summit of power. Of course, not every royal sibling pair was thrilled about it. Picture yourself at a family feast. Grapes, honey, flatbread, and the awkward realization that your wedding planner is also your grandmother. You hear whispers of jealousies, rivalries, love triangles, and more than a few accidental snake bites at dinner. Even the gods in their stories struggled. Osiris was killed by his own brother, and Isis scoured the earth to put him back together, piece by bloody piece. Sometimes, family really is a battlefield, one with pyramids as the tombstones. Now, don't get too smug, thinking this was just some ancient weirdness. Imagine you're an archaeologist brushing sand off a tomb. You find a papyrus scroll that reads like a royal soap opera. Queen Sobek-Neferu, daughter of Amenemhat III, seems to have married her own brother and then declared herself pharaoh when he died. Later, Cleopatra herself would set the tone for her dynasty, marrying not one but two of her brothers, both named Ptolemy. If the family name worked, why change it? You might think these unions were about romance or even lust, but they were far more strategic, like a chessboard with only two pieces moving back and forth again and again, until the game collapses. With every sibling marriage, the family tree grew narrower, its branches curling back upon themselves. The result? A royal line so pure it often became dangerously fragile. Genetic problems sprouted alongside the lotus blossoms, weak immune systems, deformities, and in the case of Tutankhamun, a clubbed foot and severe malarial infections that likely contributed to his early death. If you ever needed a reason to diversify your gene pool, Egyptian history is practically shaking its head at you as you wander through the gardens of the palace. Smelling lotus and sweet myrrh, you catch glimpses of daily life that contrast sharply with all this palace intrigue. For ordinary Egyptians, marriage was often about partnership, someone to help haul water, tend goats, or argue about whose turn it is to chase the scarabs out of the kitchen. But for you, dear prince or princess, love is less important than legacy. If you ever doubted that people will go to extremes for the illusion of permanence, just remember, the pyramids were built to last forever, and so too the lineages that ruled over them. At times, even the priests seem to wink at the absurdity. You hear a story about a festival where the pharaoh and his sister wife preside over a ritual reenactment of Osiris and Isis's marriage, complete with elaborate costumes, a lot of incense, and perhaps a little more wine than strictly necessary. The crowd cheers, the scribe jots down the details, and for one night, everyone pretends this is perfectly normal. But you, standing at the edge, can't help but raise an eyebrow and stifle a laugh. In the immortal words of every awkward wedding toast, well, at least they found each other. But the story of Egypt's sibling marriages is not just one of odd customs and bad genetics. It's also a tale of resilience and transformation. Even as these dynasties crumbled, invaded by Persians, conquered by Greeks, finally falling under Roman rule, the myth of the divine family lingered. Long after the last pharaoh's tomb was sealed, people still whispered about the ancient line, about those who dared to defy human boundaries in pursuit of something greater, or stranger, or simply more eternal. You stand now on the threshold of a tomb, torches burning low. As the night presses in, you can almost feel the presence of Ankhesenamun, whose life was a series of forced marriages, losses, and desperate bids for survival. She disappears from the historical record in a tangle of intrigue and sadness. Was she a victim, a survivor, or something in between? The echoes of her life seem to linger, like the flutter of linen in the desert wind. Let's leave her now and walk through the royal necropolis, feeling the cool touch of eternity on your skin. The stories of these marriages are carved in stone, but they're also written in the hush between heartbeats, the choices we make and the ones we can't escape. Maybe the Egyptians were right. In the end, everything is family, for better or worse. If nothing else, they certainly knew how to keep things interesting at family reunions. Of course, if you're feeling overwhelmed by all these royal siblings tying the knot, don't worry. We've only just begun our slow descent into the labyrinth. The world beyond Egypt is waiting, a world where sibling marriage was not just a quirk of one civilization, but a thread that wove through many, binding families and empires in knots both glorious and grotesque. So as you close your eyes tonight, drifting through the halls of ancient Egypt, let yourself wonder, what would you risk for power, for purity, for a chance to touch the divine? Would you marry your own sibling? Or would you, like so many before you, simply let the river carry you where it will, hoping the gods are kinder than your family. One last thing. Next time you see that famous golden mask, remember, behind every perfect surface is a secret. And sometimes that secret is a brother, with an awkward smile and a family tree that needs a warning label. The torches sputter low as you slip quietly from the echoing corridors of Egypt's palaces, only to find yourself standing on the threshold of yet another royal household. This time, not just in Egypt, but everywhere power has clung tightly to its own reflection. You can feel the faint vibration of centuries pressing in from all sides, the murmur of advisors and the cold logic of kings and queens who have decided, yes, we will keep it all in the family. Welcome to the world of royal bloodlines, incest by design, a reality as calculated as any game of chess, and twice as ruthless. Picture the great courts of history, where velvet-robed monarchs gather around glittering tables and study their own family trees like blueprints for a new cathedral. They aren't searching for love story, they're looking for loopholes, alliances, and the single thread of power that can never be broken. For these families, marriage is not about romance, passion, or even companionship. It is a transaction, a contract, a means to one end, absolute control. You walk into a grand medieval hall. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax, roasted meat, and something faintly metallic, ambition perhaps. Tapestries on the wall show a history of noble marriages, but if you look closely, the faces repeat: brothers and sisters, cousins, aunts and uncles, an endless waltz of familiar features. You start to wonder if you've seen the same nose 4 times in the last family portrait. Don't worry, so has everyone else. It isn't just Egypt, though the pharaohs may have started the trend. Across the world, kings and queens learned a simple lesson. When you let outsiders into the family, you let in uncertainty. Maybe your new in-law gets ideas. Maybe their cousins want a slice of the pie. Maybe their opinions about how often to clean the moat are simply intolerable. Best to avoid the risk altogether. The solution? Marry your own kin, preferably a sibling, but if not, a cousin will do. Let's step quietly into Babylon, where the kings of ancient Mesopotamia were known to wed their sisters to strengthen the royal line. The Sumerian king list, that dry old scroll of power and succession, is a catalogue not just of reigns, but of family ties wound tight enough to snap. The pattern repeats in the Persian Empire, where marrying a sister was seen as an act of piety and political genius, much to the horror of later historians who tried to make sense of those family gatherings. Even the Bible, that most quoted of ancient text, acknowledges this theme with a certain nonchalance. Abraham, the father of nations, marries his half-sister Sarah. Lot's daughters, stranded in a cave and desperate to preserve their father's line, take matters into their own hands. It's almost as if the writers wanted to remind us, in a world obsessed with legacy, morality is sometimes a luxury. Fast forward 1,000 years, the great European dynasties, think Habsburgs, Bourbons, and all those famous chins, are mapping out their marriages with mathematical precision. They marry cousins, yes, but whenever possible, they whisper about closer ties. Pure blood becomes a byword for legitimacy, and tainted blood a curse that could topple a throne. You step into a Spanish court, the stiff collars rising like battlements around anxious necks. Everyone here knows the rules. You marry your cousin, or your aunt, or on rare occasion, a sibling. If you don't, you might as well hand your crown to the nearest ambitious duke. There's a running joke in the palace kitchens that the royal family tree is less of a tree and more of a wreath, a never-ending circle. But why go to these lengths? The answer is surprisingly simple, and surprisingly dark. Inheritance, lands, titles, castles, and the right to rule, all must pass smoothly from one generation to the next, without challenge or dilution. Imagine you are a queen, ruling a country the size of France, and you marry someone from a rival house. Congratulations, you just gave away half your kingdom at the next family dinner. But if you marry your brother, the land stays where it belongs. The name remains unchallenged. The dynasty endures. There's also the matter of the divine right. For many monarchs, power was not just a privilege, it was a birthright, bestowed by God or the gods themselves. To mix that blood with outsiders, was to risk angering the heavens. And let's be honest, when your entire justification for rule is because the gods said so, you don't want to give anyone a reason to question your credentials. As you wander these glittering, chilly halls, you begin to sense the pressure that must have weighed on these royal siblings. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every stifled giggle at court was laced with the knowledge that their choices weren't their own. You might fancy the handsome knight or the clever court musician, but you know that your destiny has already been planned, inked into the pages of the royal chronicle. Picture the young girls of the Habsburg dynasty, learning to curtsy and speak 6 languages before they're even allowed to eat dinner without supervision. Their brothers are drilled in politics, war and etiquette, but also in the delicate dance of sibling loyalty, a loyalty tested in ways most of us can barely imagine. At family gatherings, the conversation isn't about summer vacations, it's about treaties, land grants, and which cousin has the healthiest teeth. And yes, there are jokes, because when reality gets this weird, humour is the only shield. The chroniclers of the medieval courts sometimes snuck a little sarcasm into their accounts. Her beauty was such that even her brother could not resist her charms. You can almost hear the eye roll echo through the parchment. You picture a royal portrait session where the painter asks, "Closer together please, pretend you're siblings who are in love." A beat of awkward silence, and then everyone resumes posing as if nothing unusual is happening. But this system came at a cost. By keeping power in the family, rulers also kept in all the flaws: hemophilia in the Russian royals, the infamous Habsburg jaw, madness in the Spanish and British lines, and a host of invisible maladies. Inheritance, after all, doesn't just mean jewels and titles. It means the quiet legacy of broken chromosomes and bodies that bear the marks of too many generations spent turning inward. Sometimes the consequences were less physical and more psychological. You're a prince who knows he can never escape his destiny, a princess who realizes that the brother she grew up fighting over toys with will one day be her husband. The palace walls close in a little tighter. The laughter at dinner grows a shade more brittle. The only escape? The rare sibling who is brave enough or reckless enough to defy the pattern, to run away, to carve their own path outside the gilded cage. Every so often a voice of reason pipes up, an advisor, a mother, even a frustrated nursemaid, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, it would be better to bring in some fresh blood. Occasionally this works. A foreign princess is brought in, and for a brief moment, the court is aflutter with the hope of new alliances and perhaps a better family nose. But more often, the cycle resumes. Old habits, as they say, die harder than old kings. This isn't just a story from the distant past. The echoes ripple forward, shaping the politics and culture of later centuries. The fear of outsiders, the obsession with purity, the willingness to sacrifice personal happiness for the illusion of control. These patterns live on, long after the last royal sibling wedding cake has been served. And yet, as you peer through the curtains at these royal lives, it's tempting to laugh at the absurdity, but take a closer look, and you might see something uncomfortably familiar. Inheritance, legacy, the desire to keep what is precious in the family, these are impulses that still shape families, businesses, even entire nations today. Maybe you're not planning to marry your sibling, phew, but who gets the house, the business, the secret recipe for grandma's baklava? The drama persists, in softer forms, through every generation. Let's not forget the occasional triumphs, the rare moments when sibling marriages forged lasting empires or created unexpected happiness. Not every royal couple was miserable, just most of them. You can almost hear the ancient counselors reminding the king, a happy wife is a happy life, even if she's your sister. 3 jokes in, and you're still awake. You're tougher than half the royal line, and so you drift from one palace to another, each with its own brand of familial tension and perfumed intrigue. Sometimes the marriages are public, celebrated with parades and fireworks. Sometimes they are whispered about, hidden behind closed doors and heavy curtains. Always the motivation is the same: to hold on to power, to keep the circle unbroken, to guard the family's place at the top of the world. Sometimes the marriages are public, celebrated with parades and fireworks. Sometimes they are whispered about, hidden behind closed doors and heavy curtains. Always, the motivation is the same: to hold on to power, to keep the circle unbroken, to guard the family's place at the top of the world. You pause at a window overlooking the darkened gardens, moonlight silvering the leaves. Somewhere below, the next generation of princes and princesses are already dreaming of love, of freedom, of a life that isn't written before it even begins. Some will accept their fate, some will rebel, all will carry the weight of choices made long before they were born. In the end, the design of royal incest is less about love than about survival. A cold calculation that sometimes produced greatness, more often tragedy, and always the sense that the world's most powerful families could also be the most lonely. So, as you step out of the hall, shoes echoing softly on the marble floor, you take a last look at the faces in those tapestries, so familiar, so strange, so trapped, and maybe, just maybe, you whisper a quiet thanks for your own family tree. Tangled though it may be, you drift deeper into the labyrinth, each footfall carrying you away from the faint comfort of general dynastic custom and into a hall of mirrors, every surface shimmering with the enigma of a single name: Cleopatra. If the idea of sibling marriage feels alien or remote, you only need to breathe the perfume-thick air of Ptolemaic Egypt to realize how breathtakingly personal and public these unions could be. Here, power is not just protected by tradition, it is performed by it, center stage for an empire that loves its spectacle as much as its secrets. The Ptolemies, Greek in origin but Egyptian by ambition, perfected the art of sibling marriage with a drama and intensity that would make even the boldest soap opera writer blush. And at the heart of this tangled web stands Cleopatra, last queen of Egypt, mythic lover of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and before all that, a daughter and sister caught in a struggle so ancient it seemed written in the stars. You blink, and you're standing in Alexandria, sunlight sparkling off marble courtyards and the scent of salt and papyrus thick in the air. You can almost hear the sea beyond the city walls, its ancient rhythm promising that nothing here ever truly changes, only repeats. Cleopatra VII Philopator, her very name, a claim to kin and country. She who loves her father, grew up in a family where marriage to your brother was as ordinary as honeyed wine at dinner. Let's set the scene. You're at a royal banquet, silver goblets clinking, musicians plucking ancient lyres, and siblings eyeing each other across the table, not with the affection of shared childhood, but with the wary calculation of rivals and future spouses. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, was himself the product of a dizzying series of cousin and sibling marriages. By the time Cleopatra was born, the genetic pool of her family was so tightly closed, it was a miracle anyone could swim in it at all. From her earliest days, Cleopatra would have known she was destined for a throne, and that the price of that destiny would be paid in alliances that made her both queen and prisoner. Her first marriage, at age 18, was to her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was about 10 at the time. Try to imagine that wedding. Instead of a first dance, perhaps a ceremonial reading of legal scrolls and a chess game to determine who'd get the better bedroom. Not exactly romantic, but then, romance had little to do with it, and so, two children, one barely a teenager, the other not yet a woman, were yoked together as king and queen. The world watched. Alexandria's population gossiped. Their courtiers circled, hungry for power. Cleopatra, already famous for her wit and charm, learned fast that a sister wife must also be a strategist, a performer, and when necessary, a survivor. Her marriage in name and law bound her to her brother, but in practice it was a slow-motion duel for the fate of Egypt. The cracks appeared quickly. Ptolemy XIII's advisors, threatened by Cleopatra's ambition and intellect, began to isolate her. Rumors swirled. Cleopatra, fluent in 9 languages and able to read Egyptian as well as Greek, a rare skill for a Macedonian, reached out to the city's people directly, while her brother's handlers plotted in the shadows. If you're picturing sibling rivalry with higher stakes, you're right. This wasn't about who got the last fig at dinner. It was about life and death, throne or exile, a kingdom's future balanced on the point of a stylus. Soon, things turned dangerous. Cleopatra was driven from the palace. forced to flee into the harsh Egyptian wilderness, while Ptolemy XIII, propped up by his ministers, declared himself sole ruler. Picture her, disguised, determined, refusing to vanish. This is the stuff of legend. The young queen floating down the Nile, hiding among traders, her mind working through alliances and betrayals even as the hot wind tugs at her linen sleeves. Now, cue one of the most famous entrances in history, Cleopatra's return to Alexandria. Smuggled into Caesar's presence rolled up in a carpet. The story is so improbable you'd laugh, except it's true. With this single bold act, Cleopatra turns her fortunes around. Julius Caesar, charmed and intrigued, becomes her ally. Ptolemy XIII, for all his royal blood, is suddenly on the losing side of history. The war that follows is swift and brutal. Ptolemy XIII drowns in the Nile, perhaps trying to escape, perhaps simply swept away by the current of destiny. But the story doesn't end there, because in true Ptolemaic fashion, Cleopatra's next marriage is to another brother, Ptolemy XIV, this time a boy of 12. At this point, if you're keeping score, you may need a family tree and a bottle of ancient Egyptian headache remedy. Cleopatra, now in her early 20s, is both queen and regent, wife to a brother, lover to a Roman, and the mother of children whose paternity would shake empires. You might wonder, was there ever a choice? In the world of the Ptolemies, marrying outside the family wasn't just discouraged, it was seen as a threat to the very fabric of power. The dynasty was a Greek import, ruling a largely Egyptian population. By keeping marriages within the family, the Ptolemies ensured that only those with pure royal blood, meaning Ptolemaic blood, could claim the throne. The alternative was chaos, rival claims, civil war, the end of the line. In a way, the sibling marriage was a political firewall, one that required constant maintenance and sacrifice. But such insulation came at a price, and it wasn't just genetic. The palace was a place of suspicion and surveillance. Spies hid behind curtains, servants listened at doors, and every shared meal could end with a goblet of poisoned wine. Cleopatra herself was a master of court intrigue, but even she could not escape the web spun by centuries of inbreeding and ambition. Here's a twist. For the general population, these royal marriages were a curiosity but not a scandal. The mythology of Egypt had long endorsed sibling unions. After all, Isis and Osiris themselves, the divine archetypes, were brother and sister. By following suit, the Ptolemies wrapped themselves in divine legitimacy, even as they imported their Macedonian customs. And besides, what was one more unusual marriage when the gods themselves had set the precedent? Still, the practicalities were often absurd. Imagine planning a royal wedding in Alexandria. You order lilies and lotus blossoms, invite dignitaries from Athens and Memphis, and try to find a priest who hasn't already officiated at 3 other sibling weddings that month. The family drama is the real entertainment. Uncle to cousin, cousin to niece, the whole line looping back on itself until the guest list is less a tree than a tangle of vines. All jokes aside, the results were catastrophic. The genetic pool grew dangerously shallow. Scholars now suspect that a host of mysterious illnesses and mental disorders haunted the later Ptolemies, and Cleopatra's own children may have carried the heavy burden of too much concentrated ancestry. The price of keeping power pure was paid in suffering, secrecy, and ultimately, collapse. Yet Cleopatra herself stands apart. Through all this turmoil, she remains a singular force, witty, ruthless, brilliant, and resilient. She speaks to the city from balconies, rides out among the people, charms Caesar and Antony, not just with her beauty but with her mind. Her marriages to her brothers are never her whole story. They are the backdrop against which her legend is cast. If you feel a shiver of sympathy for her, you're not alone. It's easy to judge from a distance, but harder to imagine what it meant to be raised in a cage of velvet and gold, every escape barred by tradition, expectation, and fear. You watch as Cleopatra navigates a court more treacherous than the crocodile-infested Nile. She knows that survival depends not just on following the rules, but on bending them. In the end, her true alliances are not with her brothers, but with the foreign conquerors who promise her a future. Julius Caesar first, then Mark Antony. Yet, Even these relationships are coloured by the shadow of her Ptolemaic heritage. No matter how far she reaches, the past always pulls her back. And as the legend goes, it is the weight of history, not love, that finally claims her. After Antony's defeat and suicide, Cleopatra finds herself cornered by Octavian, soon to be Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. She famously takes her own life, perhaps with the bite of an asp, perhaps with poison pressed to her skin. Her death marks the end of Ptolemaic Egypt, the closing of a chapter in which sibling marriage, for all its calculated purpose, could not save a dynasty from the tides of change. Step back for a moment. You're standing now in the ruins of Alexandria, the wind curling through broken columns and scattered mosaic tiles. The library is gone, the lighthouse dark, but the story lingers, ghostly, magnificent, cautionary. The image of Cleopatra endures, not just as a seductress or a queen, but as a survivor of a system that demanded everything and gave nothing in return. If you've made it this far without losing track of the family tree, give yourself a gold coin. The Ptolemies, in their relentless pursuit of power, showed the world both the allure and the devastation of keeping everything in the family. Their marriages were not just contracts, they were curses, drawing the circle ever tighter until there was nowhere left to go. So, as you let the echoes of Alexandria fade, remember, behind every legend lies a long shadow, and behind every throne, a family secret that refuses to die. The story of Cleopatra and her siblings is not just a footnote in history, it is a warning, written in papyrus, sealed in marble, whispered by the sea. And if you ever find yourself at a family reunion, dodging awkward questions and forced smiles, just remember, at least your family doesn't expect you to marry your brother for the sake of the state. Now that's what I call progress. The stone corridors of Alexandria fade, replaced now by the scent of rain on volcanic rock and the distant crash of Pacific waves. You find yourself swept across half the world and several centuries forward, shoes sinking into warm sand, a salty wind tugging at your cloak. It is night in old Hawaii, and torches flicker across a cluster of thatched roofs, a royal compound, sacred and secretive. Here the stars are close enough to touch, and the customs of the ruling class feel as ancient as the islands themselves. Forget what you think you know about island life. In the Hawaii of centuries past, the alii, the high chiefs, weren't just political leaders. They were living gods, or as close as any human could get. Their mana, a spiritual force passed down through generations, was believed to be strongest when kept pure, and purity in this world was not the absence of mistakes or the presence of virtue, but the careful management of bloodlines. It's the kind of logic that would make a spreadsheet blush. The closer the kin, the more sacred the offspring. So here's the scene. A circle of elders and priests under the open sky, the surf rolling in the distance. A young chief and his sister sit at the center, their hands entwined, adorned in red and yellow feather cloaks as vibrant as fire. There is no blushing, no awkwardness, at least not in the eyes of the watching crowd. This is a union not only permitted, but revered. Sibling marriage is the privilege of the highest rank, a sign that their manner is so great, so untainted, that only a sibling can match it. You might be squirming now, thinking of awkward thanksgivings and uncomfortable glances across the table. But in ancient Hawaii, the logic is as natural as the tides. A child born of a brother-sister union at the highest level, called Neopio, was not just royal, they were sacred, untouchable, capable of ruling the land and communing with the gods. Their words could bless or curse, their footsteps alone allowed to cross the highest temple stones. This practice was neither widespread nor casual. It was reserved for the uppermost tier, the rarest, most powerful families whose ancestry could be traced in chants sung for hours. These genealogies, memorized and recited by kahuna priests at major events, were more valuable than any written deed. To be born Neopio was to be marked for life, for good or ill. Imagine now that you're a child in such a family. From your earliest memories, the ocean is your cradle, the chant of ancestors your lullaby. You watch your mother and father, also brother and sister, move through the world like demigods. Their marriage is whispered about with reverence, not scandal. Your life is shaped by taboo, kapu, so strict that a misstep can mean death. Yet within these boundaries is a strange kind of freedom. You will be worshipped, protected, and feared. Of course, being a living deity comes with its own set of problems. Privacy is a myth. Every move is watched, every word weighed, every meal eaten in public, so that nothing unclean ever touches your plate. Your sister is not just your playmate, but your future co-ruler. The pressure is immense. Maintain the family honor or risk bringing shame on the whole island. It's enough to make even a god reach for an extra helping of poya. It wasn't always smooth sailing. The higher the stakes, the deeper the rivalries. Take the tale of Liloa and his sons, one a product of a sacred sibling marriage, the other from a union with a woman of lower rank. Their children's fates are decided not by skill or charm, but by the arrangement of their parents' bloodlines. Power struggles between half-brothers, full siblings, and ambitious cousins ripple through Hawaiian history like storm waves. If you ever thought your family squabbles were dramatic, try living in a world where birth order and genetics determine not just who gets the biggest slice of pig at dinner, but who lives or dies. At the heart of it all is the idea of kapu, the sacred system of law and taboo that structures every breath of daily life. For the highest born, sibling marriage is both a privilege and a burden. It places them at the pinnacle of society, but also sets them apart, isolated in a golden cage. Sound familiar? Maybe the trappings are different. No golden masks, no marble palaces, but the themes echo those of Egypt, Persia, and every other corner of the world where power is its own justification. And what of love? Did any of these couples actually feel affection for each other, beyond the heavy weight of tradition? The legends, as always, are ambiguous. In the Epic of Hyaka, sister to the volcano goddess Pele, themes of devotion, jealousy, and rivalry swirl together in a fog as thick as the mists on Mauna Kea. Some stories hint at genuine closeness, others at cold alliances. The truth, lost to the centuries, likely lies somewhere in between. Siblings bound by fate, struggling to carve out scraps of personal happiness in a world where the needs of the many always outweigh the desires of the few. Now let's zoom out for a joke's worth of perspective. Imagine the local matchmaker. So who's your dream partner? Well, I was thinking, my sister. It's not exactly a line that would land on a dating app today, is it? Or imagine family game night, where keeping it in the family is less a warning and more a wedding plan. Even the most serious traditions can't escape a little gentle ribbing from history. But the stakes were no joke. The future of the islands hung in the balance. A chief's child born of a lower-ranking wife might still be noble, but would never command the same awe, the same near-mythical respect as one born from a Neopio union. These chosen children, it was believed, could mediate between the gods and the people, ensure the rains came and the land flourished. When things went wrong, a failed crop, a broken taboo, it was the highest born who bore the blame. These chosen children, it was believed, could mediate between the gods and the people, ensure the rains came and the land flourished. When things went wrong, a failed crop, a broken taboo, it was the highest born who bore the blame. Over time, these customs evolved, and sometimes collided with outside influence. The arrival of Europeans, first tentative, then insistent, brought new ways of thinking. Missionaries recoiled at the idea of sibling marriage, calling it sin, abomination, a sign of savagery. But to the alii, this was simply how the world had always worked. The missionary uproar did not immediately change hearts or habits, but it planted seeds of doubt that would grow into major upheaval. Within a generation, the ancient laws began to unravel. New political alliances were formed, bloodlines mixed, and the once sacred practice of Neopio marriages faded, becoming legend rather than law. The last monarchs of Hawaii, including Queen Liliuokalani, ruled in a world where old customs were memory, powerful, poignant, but no longer binding. But the echoes remain. Even now, as you sit in the darkness listening to the surf, you can feel the weight of all those lives. Children born into glory and fear, couples joined by both love and necessity, a society held together by the belief that some families are quite literally too powerful to be broken. It's a reminder, perhaps, that every society has its own way of marking who belongs at the top, and that those ways, however strange they seem to outsiders, always make a strange kind of sense from within. You walk the shoreline now, sand cold under your toes, and think about the price of being chosen. To rule is to be alone, even among kin, to bear the expectations of gods and people alike. The sibling marriages of old Hawaii may be gone, but their legacy lives on in the stories sung and whispered under these same stars. Every chant, every legend, is a thread tying the present to a past both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking. So next time you find yourself at a family gathering, try not to complain about the awkwardness. After all, at least nobody is expecting you to secure the family fortune by marrying your sister in front of the whole village. And if your relatives start reciting your genealogy, just hope it's not the opening to a marriage proposal. You pause, the surfer lullaby in your ears, the moon high overhead. For a moment, you glimpse the alley of old majestic, proud, trapped by their own sacredness. Walking the same sands, their stories as much a part of the island as the lava flows and the wind. You smile, grateful for the strange, sad, and astonishing ways that history weaves its patterns. And as you turn away from the shore, you know, wherever you find power, you'll find the lengths to which people will go to keep it. Sometimes, those lengths are measured, not in miles or years, but in the narrow circles of family, closed so tightly that only a sibling can enter. The waves of the Pacific hush behind you, and with the soft crackle of a world dissolving, you find yourself high in the mountains, breath thin, air cold, sun blazing on peaks so white they nearly blind you. The land is ancient Peru, seat of the Inca Empire. Here, in a world suspended between sky and earth, the ruling family builds stone cities among the clouds and speaks to the sun as if he were a familiar uncle. You're entering the rarefied atmosphere of the Inca's pure line, where sibling marriage wasn't merely a right or a privilege, but a living, pulsing law of cosmic order. If you thought the Hawaiian alilai had complicated family expectations, the Inca take it several steps further. Their entire empire is founded on the principle that only those born of a royal brother and sister union are worthy to rule. In the old language of the Andes, these couples are called Koya and Sapa Inca, sister queen, and brother king, sharing not just a home but a destiny ordained by Inti, the sun god. Breathe the thin air and listen. In the heart of Cusco, gold glitters from every temple, and the city spreads out like a puma, tail and teeth and all. The palace of the Inca is a fortress and a court, a place where the world's most powerful family paces the polished stone floors. The emperor's mother and father were, more often than not, brother and sister, and the next emperor will be born to a union just as close. The logic is unshakable. Only a child of such a marriage, carrying both lines of the sun's descent, can inherit the mascapatcha, the crimson fringe that marks the Sapa Inca. It's a tradition so ingrained that you can hear it in every story, every song. You watch the annual Inti Raymi festival, sun priests in bright feathers praising Inti as the king's sister and wife stands beside him, dazzling in a dress of turquoise and gold. Her presence isn't ornamental, it's essential. Without her, the king is just another nobleman. Together, they form a living bridge between gods and mortals, their union a guarantee that the empire's soul will not be diluted by the blood of outsiders. If you imagine a cold, loveless arrangement, pause. The reality is stranger, softer, and sometimes sadder. For the chosen royal siblings, the expectation is absolute. The Sapa Inca is surrounded by wives, sometimes dozens, but only the Koya, the principal wife, and his sister will be the mother of his heir. The rest are for politics, pleasure, or alliances. The Koya alone is sacred, the only one whose children can ever dream of the throne. Step quietly through these echoing halls. Every detail is precise, sacred. The way maize is planted, the way gold is polished, the order in which the family sits at a feast. You sense the weight on the royal siblings, their lives mapped from birth, every friendship and rivalry shadowed by the knowledge that they will one day share, not just a palace, but a bed, a destiny, and an empire. There are moments, private, unrecorded, when you wonder if they ever wish to trade places with the villagers outside, whose marriages are chosen for love, luck, or laughter. Yet for the Inca, this arrangement is the bedrock of their civilization. The emperor, after all, is more than a man. He is Intip-Turin, the son of the sun, and the sun's rays, so the priests say, must not stray far from their source. If you ever doubted the lengths to which humans will go to keep power pure, stand on a Cusco terrace at dusk and look at the line of the royal family, proud, isolated, yet utterly convinced of their cosmic purpose. Let's slip into a festival, the air thick with burning incense, and music made from bone flutes and conch shells. The royal siblings are on display, gowned, crowned, as radiant as the morning star. The Koya's hand rests lightly on her brother's arm. On the surface, all is ritual, all is harmony, yet beneath, you sense the usual tangle, jealousy, resentment, the heartbreak of marriages made for politics and not for the heart. Stories leak through the stonework, whispered by servants and sung by wandering poets. There's the tale of Huayna Capac, one of the last great Sapa Incas, who married his sister Chincha Aclo. She bore him Huascar, the pure air. But Huayna Capac's favourite wife was another, and her son, Atahualpa, though not born of a sibling union, became the darling of the court for his cunning and charisma. When Huayna Capac died, the empire was torn in two, Huascar with the purest blood, Atahualpa with the most support. The war that followed shattered the empire, leaving it vulnerable to Pizarro and the Spanish. So there it is, spelled out in heartbreak. Sometimes even the purest blood can't stop the flood of fate. For all their cosmic certainty, the Incas were not immune to the same problems as every other family dynasty tangled in sibling marriage. Children born to brother-sister unions faced increased risks: hemophilia, frailty, mysterious illnesses that no healer could touch, and the personal cost, as always, was steep. Love was something to be postponed, hoped for, or quietly stolen. For every king and queen immortalized in gold, there are countless siblings who chafed under the golden collar of tradition. Still, for the Inca, the risks were justified by a kind of faith that their empire, ordered like the heavens themselves, would last forever. The sibling marriages at the center of it all were not just about keeping power, they were about holding the world together, making sense of the sun's cycles and the mountain's shadows. When a new Sapa Inca was crowned, the entire empire paused to witness the union, the recitation of ancestors, the blessing of the earth. The people believed that if the Koya and the king ruled together in harmony, the rains would come, the corn would grow, and the empire would prosper. You wander through the terraces at Machu Picchu, imagining what it must have felt like to carry so much expectation on such young shoulders. The Sapa Inca and his sister queen are never just a couple. They are the living axis of the world, the channel through which all power flows. The festival crowds cheer, the priests sing, and somewhere quietly the royal children count the cost of their crowns. But the world changes. When the Spanish arrived, swords glinting and Bibles raised, they were appalled by the Inca custom, a crime against nature, the priests called it, a sign of barbarism. Yet the Spaniards, for all their outrage, never quite understood what sibling marriage meant in this world. To them it was a perversion. To the Inca it was order, stability, the sun's light shining through blood and bone. With conquest came chaos. The old laws unraveled, sibling marriages vanished, forbidden by the new rulers and erased from the official histories. The last Sapa Incas died in exile or were killed, their lines lost or scattered, yet the stories linger, whispered in the Andes winds, a memory of a world where love and power were woven together in patterns as intricate as any textile. Now, as you stand in the ruins, the shadows long and the sky blazing with southern stars, you feel the ache of all that has been lost. The stones are cold, but the stories are alive. You wonder, was it worth it? Was the empire's order, its stability, its golden age, worth the price paid by those royal siblings forced into a union neither could escape? History rarely answers such questions. It leaves us only with echoes, songs of the sun, tales of kings and queens who were brother and sister, partners and rivals, rulers and captives. The legacy is written in both triumph and tragedy, in cities built on mountains and in the loneliness of thrones. So, as you drift back from the Andes, heart heavy and mind whirring, Let yourself marvel at the lengths to which people will go to keep the world as they wish it to be. Sometimes those lengths are measured in walls of stone, miles of terraces, or the narrow, fragile space between two siblings sharing a crown. Maybe, just maybe, there's a lesson here that even the most powerful, the most divine, are still human, longing for love, haunted by loss, and bound by the choices of those who came before them. A hush settles over the Andes, and once more you feel the air thicken, the pulse of centuries, the hush of candlelit halls, the faint taste of iron in your mouth as you cross the threshold into another royal world. Now, you stand at the heart of Europe, surrounded by portraits whose eyes seem to follow you down velvet-draped corridors. Welcome to the land of the Habsburgs, where chins grew longer, bloodlines tighter, and power meant never letting the family's fortune slip through unfamiliar hands. This is the world of Habsburgs and the curse of blue blood, the story as grand as any epic but twice as strange, and with consequences you can see right on the faces of its most famous rulers. Here, sibling marriage wasn't always the rule, but inbreeding certainly was, and the quest for dynastic purity wove a legacy so tangled it nearly strangled an empire. Start with a painting, a young princess, pale and solemn, fingers twined in lace. At first you think she must be shy, but look closer. Her jaw juts forward, lips pout in a peculiar way, her eyes haunted and a little weary. She is Maria Anna of Spain, a Habsburg through and through, and her portrait tells you more than any family tree ever could. The Habsburgs understood early on that in a Europe fractured by war, religion, and politics, the surest way to hold on to power was to keep it in the family, and so, over centuries the Habsburgs became the great matchmakers of the royal world, sisters to brothers, uncles to nieces, cousins to cousins. Sometimes, marriages between siblings happened directly. More often it was first cousins or uncles and nieces, but the result was the same. Bloodlines looping back on themselves, secrets multiplying in shadowed rooms, and eventually a family portrait that looked like it had been painted using only one or two faces. You stride the grand halls of Vienna's Hofburg Palace, candlelight glinting on polished wood and gilded ceilings. Every turn offers a reminder. Habsburg history is written not in words but in faces, and the face that comes to define this dynasty literally is the famous Habsburg jaw, a protruding mandible so distinctive that it became an unofficial coat of arms. Some say the family could have chewed through the walls of their own palace if they'd wanted. Jokes aside, the Habsburg jaw wasn't just a harmless quirk, it was the visible sign of something far deeper, generations of genetic narrowing, a consequence of marriages that doubled back, again and again upon the same set of ancestors. The science of today calls it inbreeding depression. For the Habsburgs, it meant a gallery of royals plagued by epilepsy, infertility, developmental delays, and the kind of melancholy that seeps into every official portrait. You might think this was simply a mistake, an accident of custom or ignorance. But no, the Habsburgs, like so many ruling houses, knew exactly what they were doing. In their minds, a tightly controlled bloodline meant stability, continuity, and legitimacy. Every cousin married was a rival pacified. Every niece wedded a kingdom held close. It's only in hindsight that the cost becomes clear. Let's meet a few of these blue-blooded icons. There's Charles II of Spain, the last of his line, a man whose life was shaped by the tragic math of Habsburg genetics. Charles was the product of generations of cousin marriages, his parents' uncle and niece. The result, a monarch so frail and sickly that he could barely chew food, much less chew out his courtiers. His medical problems read like a cautionary tale: intellectual disabilities, seizures, infertility, and a famously elongated jaw that made speech nearly impossible. The result? A monarch so frail and sickly that he could barely chew food, much less chew out his courtiers. His medical problems read like a cautionary tale: intellectual disabilities, seizures, infertility, and a famously elongated jaw that made speech nearly impossible. It gets worse. By the time Charles reached adulthood, his body was so fragile that palace rumors whispered he was bewitched. He could not produce an heir. His reign, plagued by war and intrigue, ended with the Habsburg line in Spain crumbling to dust. The empire that once ruled half the world, from South America to the Low Countries, died with a man whose family tree was less a tree and more a single, withering branch. Yet the Habsburg story isn't just a tale of decline, it's also one of extraordinary ambition of queens and kings who wielded power with an iron hand, who brokered marriages like business deals, who believed so fiercely in their own blood that they'd risk anything, even the health and happiness of their children, to keep the legacy alive. You stroll through the Spanish Escorial, passing the tombs of Philip II, who married his niece, and Philip I, who repeated the pattern. The halls are cold, but the ambition still burns. It wasn't just Spain. The Austrian branch of the family was equally committed to the cause. Empress Maria Theresa, one of the most powerful women in history, was herself the product of multiple generations of intermarriage. Her children, 16 in all, were married off with an eye not for love but for political advantage. Let others wage war, the saying went. But you, happy Austria, marry. The result? An empire built on alliances, treaties, and a family tree that resembled a tangled necklace. For the people living under Habsburg rule, the consequences could be far-reaching. As the royal family grew more insular, their ability to relate to ordinary people weakened. Decisions were made in echo chambers. Rebellions simmered unchecked by the fresh ideas and vigor that outsiders might have brought. Even as the palaces grew more elaborate, the line itself grew weaker. But, oh the stories, the gossip of Vienna and Madrid was as sharp as any blade. Was it true that Emperor Leopold I wore his wig so low to hide his jaw? Did Maria Anna's marriage to her uncle spark the latest war in the Spanish Netherlands? Did the palace chefs have to puree food for Charles II? Behind every rumour was a kernel of truth, and behind every truth, a family struggling with the consequences of its own stubbornness. Still, there was glamour amid the gloom. The Habsburgs were collectors, patrons, dreamers. They built castles that touched the sky, sponsored composers and artists, and threw balls that lasted till dawn. It was a life of spectacle and shadow, of luxury and loneliness. For every child paraded in golden robes, there was another kept hidden from view, too sick or frail to face the public. Walk through the gardens at Schönbrunn Palace and you'll sense the ghosts' children, who played beneath marble fountains, queens who paced the halls at midnight, wondering if the price of power was too high. There is a kind of tragedy here, a slow, inevitable reckoning with choices made in candlelit rooms long ago. And yet, for all their failings, the Habsburgs endured. The Austrian branch limped on into the 20th century, the faces in the portraits growing more somber, the blood more diluted as outsiders finally married in. The world changed, revolutions swept away the old order, and the age of royal sibling marriage faded into history. But the lessons remain, written not just in textbooks, but in bones, in portraits, in the odd angle of a jaw glimpsed in an old photograph. Let's pause for a bit of levity, because even in the darkest stories, there's room for a laugh. Imagine the royal tailor being handed measurements, waist, chest, and jaw, or the family physician's advice, maybe, just maybe, consider a family picnic instead of a family wedding next year. The palace cat, if you believe the stories, was one of the few in Vienna with a truly diverse pedigree. But behind the humour lies a warning. The Habsburgs remind us that power, hoarded and protected too fiercely, can become a prison. The very measures taken to preserve a dynasty can doom it to decline. The jaw, the illnesses, the tragedies, they're all chapters in a story of what happens when the desire for continuity trumps the wisdom of change. So as you step back out into the cool European night, the lights of Vienna glowing on the horizon, you feel a mix of awe and sadness. The Habsburgs reached higher than almost any family in history. In the end, their greatest achievement was also their greatest curse. As you pull the covers tighter around you tonight, maybe you'll dream of palaces and portraits, of laughter echoing down marble halls, and the quiet hope that your own family tree, tangled though it may be, is all the richer for a bit of healthy distance. The night air shifts again, the stone and gilt of Vienna fading into a world painted with fire and the scent of frankincense. Your footsteps echo on ancient tiles, but this time the rhythms and shadows are different. Now you're gliding through the candlelit palaces of Persia, land of poets and conquerors, where empires rose and fell on the power of ideas, and sometimes on the tangled roots of royal family trees. Here, in the golden dusk of antiquity, you witness a tradition both spiritual and startling, the sibling marriages of Zoroastrian royal siblings, justified by the oldest fires known to humankind. Persia's legends are deep wells of myth memory, and a distinctly sacred kind of sibling bond. If you ever wondered how far the world's ruling families would go to claim the divine, the answer lies here, between the Avestas verses and the gossip of the ancient Persian court. Step softly now, through a city like Persepolis. You're surrounded by the clangor of festival drums and the hush of priests tending the eternal flame. Here, kings are not just men, but the representatives of Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, and the keeper of the holy fire. The old Zoroastrian law, the Kvetukdas, is whispered behind marble columns, a decree so bold it startles even the seasoned traveller. It states, with unnerving clarity, that the highest act of spiritual union is to marry within the family, first cousin to first cousin, uncle to niece, and at its most sacred, brother to sister. To outsiders, Greek historians, scandalized Roman envoys, this is the ultimate taboo, but to the Persians, who lived under the old law, Kvetukdas was both logical and luminous. Its purpose, to keep the royal bloodline so pure that the king and queen could stand as the earthly mirror of the holy twins, the Amesha Spentas, who were themselves divine siblings. Picture yourself at the coronation of a Sasanian king. The air is thick with saffron and sandalwood. The royal family stands beneath a carved frieze of gods and heroes, and at the king's side, in jewels and veils, is his sister, his wife, his equal in blood and blessing. Together they kneel as the Mobades, the high priests, offer prayers to the flame. This marriage is not simply permitted, it is exalted, woven into the fabric of the faith. But why this divine logic? Zoroastrianism, the world's first great monotheism, places a fierce emphasis on purity, both physical and spiritual. Marrying a sibling, according to ancient law, ensures that the royal fire burns without taint from outsiders. Just as the sacred flame is kept from contamination, so too is the family line. The closer the blood, the closer to the original spark of creation. Yet, not every Persian bought into this custom without a second thought. Even in its heyday, Kvetukdas was controversial. The poets mocked it gently, the philosophers raised eyebrows, and some kings avoided it when they could. The law was flexible, sometimes honoured in word, sometimes bent in practice, always the subject of quiet debate over cups of honeyed wine. Still, among the Sasanian elite and certain Zoroastrian clergy, brother-sister marriage was practiced enough to shock the world. And the world was shocked. When Alexander's Greeks swept through Persia, they recorded their disbelief with a mixture of revulsion and fascination. Later, Islamic chroniclers condemned the practice as sinful, using it as a sign of Persian decadence. But for centuries, the Zoroastrian kings shrugged off outside judgment. Their line was sacred, and the laws of men meant less than the laws of the gods. Let's step into a royal chamber. Here sits Shapur II, the longest reigning Sasanian emperor, flanked by his mother-sister queen. The children, both cousins and siblings, are praised as the purest in the land. The priests teach that this union brings harmony to the world, a mirror of cosmic order, as above so below. Yet the practice wasn't always so harmonious in daily life. Sibling marriages, especially among the elite, often led to the same problems seen everywhere: rivalries, jealousies, the agony of duty over desire. Whispered tales tell of sisters forced into marriages with brothers they resented, of queens who pined for other loves, of kings who secretly yearned for a bond that was more partnership than obligation. And there were consequences. Just as in Egypt and Europe, repeated close-kin marriage brought a shadow of sickness to royal lines, fragility, weakness, maladies that even the best physicians could not heal. But the greatest cost may have been emotional. Imagine living your life within a golden circle, where love must always be filtered through the lens of duty. Even when the world changes and new faiths arrive with new taboos, the stories linger, melancholy, magnificent, unforgettable. Here's a joke for the ages. You can almost imagine a nervous Persian prince telling his sister at dinner, "It's not you, it's Zoroaster," or a poet composing a verse, "Roses are red, violets are blue, there's no one at court who's as closely related as you." Even the wise Ahura Mazda, if he looked down from his shining realm, might shake his head at the labyrinth humans make of love and law. As centuries pass, the practice recedes. With the Islamic conquest, Catholicism is denounced and gradually vanishes, surviving only in rumour and the most isolated villages. The old Zoroastrian fire temples fall silent. The royal palaces crumble, and the memory of sibling marriage drifts into legend. But for 1,000 years or more, it shaped the fate of kings and queens, and left its stamp on the greatest empire the world had known. Even today, in the stories of Persian poets and the teachings of the Zoroastrian diaspora, you catch echoes of that age, where the highest union was both a blessing and a burden, where the search for purity wove chains as well as crowns. As you step out into the cool night, the scent of roses and fire lingering on your skin, you realize every empire leaves behind both ruins and rituals, customs that once seemed eternal and now read like riddles from another world. Sibling marriage in Persia, for all its strangeness, was once the heart of a dream that kings and queens could touch the divine if only they stayed close enough to the beginning. And as the moon rises over the old city walls, you can't help but smile. History, after all, is a banquet where every custom is served up sooner or later, and sometimes the strangest dishes are the ones that tell us most about what it means to be human. The moonlight that once bathed Persian palaces now bends across a continent and into the crimson glow of a world ruled by dragons. Imperial China, where the silk-robed court whispers with ambitions as old as the mountains. You're gliding now through the shadowy depths of the Forbidden City, its vermilion gates shutting out not only commoners but often the very breeze of change. Here, behind layers of gold and jade, we peer into the hush of the Ming dynasty's forbidden ties, where sibling marriage, while rarer than in Egypt or Persia, flickered at the highest echelons, and the management of bloodlines could be every bit as ruthless. China's imperial past is usually associated with an elaborate etiquette of exogamy, a preference for alliances between distant clans, ensuring that no single family, except the emperors, gained too much power. But walk through history's corridors and you'll discover the exceptions. Imperial siblings, whose marriages and relationships swirled in a net of secrecy, necessity, and sometimes sheer desperation. Let's set the scene. It's the 14th century, and Zhu Yanzhang, the peasant-turned-general who will become the Hongwu emperor, has founded the Ming dynasty. He's a man obsessed with control. In his new meticulously ordered court, hierarchy is everything. Wives, consorts, concubines, every relationship is mapped and measured, but always at the apex sits the emperor and his family, his word as final as a thunderclap. In theory, Confucian law and tradition strictly forbade marriage between close kin, especially siblings, yet in the private chambers of the palace, where rules bent to the emperor's will, the urge to keep imperial blood pure sometimes clashed with the realities of succession and security. Brother-sister marriage, while far less common than in the West or Middle East, was not unheard of in China's long tapestry of dynastic politics. Imagine the world of a princess, the emperor's beloved sister. She is more than a daughter, she's a chess piece in the empire's grand game, her affections and fate sealed by the politics of the day. Occasionally, an emperor suspicious of court factions, terrified of coups, might arrange for a favoured sister to marry not outside the palace, but within, either to a brother or more often to a close cousin, nephew, or uncle. The goal was always the same: keep loyalty close, prevent powerful in-laws from threatening the throne, and ensure that secrets, like jewels, remained locked inside the palace. A famous example, though debated by historians, swirls around the Yongle emperor, who rose to power amid a storm of civil war and intrigue. Some accounts suggest that, to shore up his claim and ensure no outside family could challenge him, he orchestrated marriages between his siblings and other immediate kin. The truth, as with so many royal secrets, is foggy, a blend of fact and legend, whispers beneath lacquered screens. You wander through the midnight gardens of the imperial city, peonies and chrysanthemums drooping under the weight of dew, The air is thick with secrets. Sometimes the pressure to keep things in the family didn't always mean formal marriage. It might mean enforced celibacy for imperial princesses, or clandestine relationships so deeply buried that only a chance note in a eunuch's memoir reveals them. A younger sister might become an unofficial consort to her brother, the emperor, her life both privileged and circumscribed, her happiness a matter of state. And then there are the shadows at the edges, tales of rivalries that turn deadly. In the Ming court, where the succession was often far from secure, a sibling's affection could turn to jealousy, and jealousy to conspiracy. The fate of an entire dynasty might turn on whether a brother could trust his sister or whether she might love him just a little too much. The line between devotion and danger blurred, drawn and redrawn with every new reign. The fate of an entire dynasty might turn on whether a brother could trust his sister or whether she might love him just a little too much. The line between devotion and danger blurred, drawn and redrawn with every new reign. But it's not all darkness. Even amid the palace's suffocating rituals, there were moments of gentleness, shared memories of childhood, secret laughter behind silken screens, the comfort of a bond that was both ancient and uniquely personal. The emperor, for all his might, was also a brother, and the princess a sister, caught in the endless tug-of-war between duty and affection. Yet, the price for these forbidden ties could be devastating. If a sibling relationship, romantic or otherwise, was discovered and deemed improper, the consequences were harsh. Exile, forced suicide, erasure from the historical record. Many stories have simply vanished, swept away by censors eager to present an image of perfect order. What remains are the fragments, lines of poetry hinting at forbidden love, tomb inscriptions that list siblings as inseparable companions, paintings where the gaze between prince and princess is a shade too intense for comfort. Here's a joke whispered by a Rye court eunuch. Why did the emperor marry his sister? Because everyone else was plotting against him. Not exactly stand-up material, but in a palace where trust was as rare as honest laughter, even a dark joke could make hearts lighter. As the centuries rolled on, the Qing dynasty, China's last, brought new rules, but the pressure on imperial siblings barely eased. Now Manchu princes and princesses found themselves even more tightly bound by laws meant to protect the Waisinjuoro bloodline. Brother-sister marriages were explicitly banned, but the alliances between cousins and close kin continued, driven by the same anxiety a dynasty's power was only as secure as its family's loyalty. Of course, outside the palace, ordinary people followed their own rules. For the vast majority of Chinese, sibling marriage was unthinkable, a source of horror rather than pride. Stories of imperial scandal, when they leaked, became popular ballads and cautionary tales. Don't be like the emperor's sister, trapped forever behind painted walls. Sometimes the village storytellers got in a sly dig at the rich and powerful, reminding everyone that even the greatest rulers couldn't escape the chaos of their own hearts. Still, every dynasty, every family has its rebels. Some princesses broke the rules, escaping the palace in disguise, choosing love over duty and safety over secrecy. Their stories, half myth, half wishful thinking, are celebrated in folk tales embroidered into tapestries and whispered by moonlit ponds. The modern world, when it arrived, swept away many of the old taboos and protections. With the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1912, China's royal families lost both their power and their claustrophobic prisons. The era of arranged sibling marriages faded, replaced by the freedom and uncertainty of new beginnings. But the legacy lingers, like a faint perfume on ancient silk, in every family wrestling with loyalty and betrayal, in every whispered secret or forbidden crush, you can hear the echoes of those old palaces. Even today, the phrase Jingji Yuye, golden branches, jade leaves, is used to describe the privileged children of powerful families, children who, like the royals before them, carry the burden of being both the hope and the prison of their house. You step out of the forbidden city's shadow, the sun just beginning to rise above the rooftops. The city is waking up, no longer ruled by dragons, but alive with a million stories. In the light of morning, it's easy to forget how strange and dark some of those stories were. But if you listen, really listen, you can still hear the heartbeat of old China pulsing through the alleys and gardens, reminding you that even the most forbidden love was once the law of the land. And perhaps as you slip back into your own life, you'll feel a little sympathy for those imperial siblings, so close to power, so far from freedom, and forever caught between what the world demands and what the heart desires. The hush of the Forbidden City still clings to your sleeves as you leave Asia behind and step once more into the warm, golden twilight of the Nile. You are travelling backward and forward at once, because some stories never truly end. They simply reinvent themselves in new forms. Tonight, you slip into the glittering world of Pharaoh Akhenaten and Nefertiti, a chapter so wrapped in sunlight and shadow that you're never sure if you're seeing history or a dream. You walk the avenues of Akhenaten, the new city carved out of desert by a king determined to change everything. The sandstone shines like honey in the late afternoon, and everywhere you look, new temples rise, fresh paint vivid against the pale sky. Let's set the stage. Akhenaten, born Amenhotep I, is the heretic pharaoh, a dreamer, a reformer, a man so radical that he dares to tell the ancient priests, no more gods, only the Aten. The sun's disk is divine, and at his side, always, is Nefertiti. She is beautiful. Yes, her name literally means the beautiful one has come, but she is also powerful, intelligent, and according to the latest evidence, possibly both Akhenaten's wife and his half-sister. Some scholars argue she might even be his full sister, as royal records become more ambiguous the deeper you look. In the world of the 18th dynasty, sibling marriage is not just tradition, it is divine choreography. You can imagine the palace life, Akhenaten and Nefertiti, ruling together as co-equals, their 6 daughters the subjects of countless frescoes and statues. Every image shows them close hands clasped, faces turned toward each other, the sun's rays streaming down to bless them and their children. But here's the twist. In a court obsessed with change, Akhenaten's embrace of sibling marriage is actually a reaffirmation of the oldest myth in the book. By wedding his sister, he claims not only the throne, but the ancient right to remake the world. For the people outside the palace, this is both shocking and eerily familiar. They grumble about the king's heresies, but nod at the marriage. It is, after all, how the gods themselves ruled. You might wonder what daily life was like for these divine siblings. Imagine a royal breakfast, bread and figs under colonnaded shade, daughters playing at their feet. Yet, like all families, theirs is far from perfect. Whispers circle the palace, tensions between the queen and the king's other wives, uncertainty about the succession, the tragic loss of children, painted lovingly in tombs, but lost too young to history's storms. For all the talk of divinity, Akhenaten's family suffers the same griefs as any other, only magnified by the impossible weight of expectation. There's also a practical side to all this myth-making. By marrying his sister, Akhenaten ensures that no rival family can claim the throne through marriage. His daughters, too, are said to have married their own father, further tightening the knot of royal blood. Why this extreme? Because in Akhenaten's eyes, his family is the new pantheon. Just as he has abolished the old gods, he has recast his wife, his daughters, and himself as the only intermediaries between humanity and the sun. To challenge their union is to challenge the sun itself. Good luck getting a rain check on that. Of course, not everyone is on board with this solar revolution. In distant temples, the old priesthood plots. In the villages, farmers mutter that the floods are weaker this year, that the new gods do not answer their prayers. Akhenaten's experiment grows more radical. Artwork shifts to a startling realism, with the royal family depicted in intimate, almost awkward poses, their elongated faces unlike anything seen before or since. Some have speculated that these artistic quirks mirror the physical oddities of the family, perhaps signs of congenital illness caused by generations of close-kin marriage. Whether true or not, the rumours ripple outward, fusing fact and fable. Yet for all its risks, this moment is golden. The walls of Amarna are alive with colour, poetry, music. Nefertiti stands at the centre of it all, sometimes depicted as equal to Akhenaten, even as his co-ruler. She performs rituals, gives commands, her profile etched in stone, immortal and enigmatic. Together they try to mould Egypt into something new, a kingdom of sunlight and music, the old order washed away in the dawn. It cannot last. Akhenaten's reforms, Provoke too much opposition, the empire's economy begins to crack, and the power of the old priesthood reasserts itself. After Akhenaten's mysterious death, Nefertiti vanishes from the record, possibly dead, possibly ruling in disguise, possibly both, and the royal family, Incan, one of Akhenaten and Nefertiti's daughters, survives, only to become the queen and half-sister of the boy king Tutankhamun. The cycle continues. The pattern endures. Even as Egypt reverts to its ancient ways, the tradition of sibling marriage remains at the very heart of royal power, a strange, unbreakable logic. Now you wander the ruins of Amarna, the sand whispering under your feet. You think of Nefertiti, not just a face but a force, a survivor. Was she happy? Did she love her brother husband? Or did she, like so many royal women before her, simply do what she must to survive? The truth is lost to time, but the art remains, a family joined at the soul, determined to outshine the sun itself. Let's pause for a moment of humour, a little ancient Egyptian stand-up. What did Akhenaten say when Nefertiti caught him marrying their daughter? Relax, dear, it's all for the good of the sun. If you're rolling your eyes, so would half the royal household. In a world this surreal, you either laugh or lose your mind. But beneath the jokes and the tragedy, the story of Akhenaten and Nefertiti is more than just a cautionary tale. It is a testament to the power of belief, the way humans will upend the world, break every taboo if they think it will win them a place among the stars. And it's a reminder too that families, even divine ones, are complicated, contradictory, and often desperately human. So as you step out of the shadow of Akhenaten and back into your own night, take with you the lesson of the Sun King and his queen, that every revolution leaves scars, every dynasty its secrets, and that sometimes the strangest marriages create the brightest if briefest moments in history. And if your own family seems complicated tonight, just be glad you don't need to start a new religion to get through Sunday dinner. The sandy silence of Amarna recedes, and now your senses reel at the heat and dust of a place both ancient and biblical. Judea, crossroads of empire, faith and ambition. The scent is frankincense and myrrh, the sound is sandals on marble, and the mood is forever tense. For this is a kingdom where family ties are as twisted as the desert roots. If the pharaohs married their sisters to keep the gods on their side, the Herods did it to keep their heads above the quicksand of Roman politics. Here, family is fortress and prison, and loyalty is measured not by love but by how well you can outmaneuver your nearest relatives. You step through the palace gates and find yourself in a world so chaotic that it makes Egypt's royal family look like a cozy sitcom. Only the stakes here are much, much deadlier. Let's meet the main players. Herod the Great. Yes, that Herod, builder of the Second Temple, killer of rivals, and according to the New Testament, the would-be murderer of infants in Bethlehem. Herod didn't inherit a throne through blood alone. He had to claw his way to it, balancing Roman approval, local suspicion, and a maze of alliances and betrayals that would test the nerve of any ruler. In this world, marriage is not about uniting kingdoms, but about keeping enemies close, sometimes so close they share your own blood. The Herod dynasty didn't practice sibling marriage as openly as the Ptolemies or Habsburgs, but their brand of familial union was no less twisted. Cousins married cousins, nieces married uncles, and on several infamous occasions, brothers married their half-sisters, all in the name of keeping royal legitimacy and thus survival inside the family. Take Herod's own house. His grandfather was an Idumean descended from Edomites, and his grandmother, Nabatean Arabian royalty. Herod's marriages, at least 10 by most counts, were strategic, but so were those he arranged for his children and grandchildren. His son Aristobulus was married to his cousin Mariamne, herself descended from a line of Hasmonean kings and queens, who for generations preferred their own kin to strangers. For the Hasmoneans, whose power Herod was so desperate to absorb, sibling marriage had become a tool of statecraft, a way of keeping every claim to the priesthood or crown safely under one roof. Picture the wedding feast, an endless table of fig cakes, roast lamb, and nervous glances. At the head sit two people whose relationship is so knotted with shared ancestry that even the family historian needs a nap halfway through the explanation. This is no ordinary union. It's a public declaration of power, a warning shot to every cousin with a sword and an eye on the throne. For these rulers, marriage is not a private matter, but a political grenade, one that can detonate at the faintest hint of betrayal. The Herods, like so many dynasties, paid the price for such relentless insularity. Their palaces seethed with suspicion. Herod the Great, convinced that his beloved Mariamne was plotting against him, had her executed. Later, overcome by remorse or madness, he murdered 2 of their sons as well. And what of Berenice herself? History remembers her as a tragic figure, both pawn and player. When the flames of Jerusalem's last great revolt began to burn, Berenice stood beside her brother as queen and consort, defying both Jewish and Roman norms. Let's pause for a moment, because if all this sounds like the plot of a particularly wild soap opera, you're not wrong. Imagine the palace scribe scratching his head, forced to record a marriage between a brother and sister, only to cross it out when another cousin marries the same bride a month later. But behind the gallows humor lies a darker reality. The cost of keeping power in the family was often blood, betrayal, and heartbreak. The Hasmoneans and Herodians both believed that close kin marriage would ensure unity and purity, but instead it made every family gathering a potential massacre. By the time the Romans swept away the last traces of Herod's line, the dynasty had become a byword for self-destruction. Of course, the Herods were not operating in a vacuum. All around them, the world's great empires, Egypt, Rome, Persia, had shown that sibling or cousin marriage was the ultimate political insurance policy. But in Judea, where Jewish law strictly forbade such unions, the Torah is clear on the matter. Every marriage was also a gamble against the anger of priests, prophets, and the people themselves. The result? A legacy as twisted as the roots of the olive trees outside Jerusalem's walls. You step out into the cool night, listening as a new king rises, a new queen plots, a new generation repeats the old mistakes. The echoes of the Herods ring out in every throne room where family is used as a weapon, every council where blood is valued above virtue. Their story is a warning that the bonds of blood, when drawn too tight, can strangle not just love, but an entire kingdom. So the next time your family gets in a squabble over the last piece of baklava, be glad that nobody's plotting to marry their cousin for control of the family business. Or worse, plotting to poison them at the next holiday feast. Sometimes a little healthy distance is the best gift any family can offer. And as the dawn breaks over Jerusalem's old stones, you realize the Herods may be long gone, but their lesson remains, written in blood and whispers. For every ruler who thinks that the closest ties are always the strongest, you linger on the edge of the Mediterranean, but now the wind carries you westward, across vast seas, across centuries, to a land where kings and priests raised stepped pyramids from the jungle, and the moon rose huge above the obsidian earth. The world you enter is ancient Mesoamerica, a land of feathers, smoke, and sacred blood. Here, in the stories of the Toltecs, the Maya, and those who came before, you catch the scent of the old, secret rites, the divine union of siblings, written not just in stone but in myth and memory. This is the shadowed heart, the Toltecs and divine union, where brother and sister marriages, half shrouded in legend, shaped the fate of entire peoples. You find yourself wandering the great ceremonial avenues of Tolan, the city of the Toltecs, sometimes called the Place of Reeds. Giant stone columns rise toward the starlit sky, carved with jaguars, eagles, and gods with eyes like midnight. It's here that myth and history twist together, inseparable, as the vines tangled in the ruins. The Toltecs, who flourished in central Mexico centuries before the rise of the Aztecs, believed their rulers were more than men. They were gods reborn, descended from the stars. Unlike the public pageantry of Egypt or the Habsburgs' family portraits, the Toltecs wove their sibling marriages in shadows. Beneath the surface of their myths, the sources are tantalizingly vague. Spanish chroniclers, missionaries, and later Aztec scribes hint at brother-sister unions among the Toltec and Maya elite, but always in whispers, with a mixture of awe and dread. In a world where the divine right to rule meant channeling the power of gods like Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, no ordinary marriage would suffice. Only a union mirroring the gods' own could hold the universe together. Imagine a royal ceremony in Toland's heart. The king, his headdress bursting with quetzal feathers, stands beside his sister, the future queen. Their hands are joined in a ritual that binds not just their bodies, but the fates of their people. And as in every court, beneath the surface runs the current of politics and rivalry. The king's sister is no mere ornament. She is a queen in her own right, a priestess who mediates between the gods and the people. Her children, born of her brother's seed, are seen as more than royal. They are semi-divine, living links to the creator gods themselves. But this is Mesoamerica, a world where myth and history are always dancing. In the stories of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, the creator and civilizer of humankind, you hear echoes of divine sibling unions. It isn't just the Toltecs, either. Move deeper into the jungle and you reach the Maya, whose kings often styled themselves as divine twins, children of the sun and moon. While the surviving inscriptions are cautious about detailing sibling marriage, the pattern is there: heirs who are pure, queens, whose bloodline is traced not just to kings, but to the same mother and father as their husbands. Step softly through the cool, green courtyards of a Maya city like Palenque. Hear the priest chants, echoing from the temple tops. See the ruler, Pakal the Great perhaps, or one of his many descendants, carving his own story into the stone, forever tying his reign to the gods' approval. Of course, these marriages weren't always happy. The pressure on royal siblings was enormous. Every decision, every ritual, every child born or lost was a matter of state, of fate. In the heart of the jungle, with storms raging and enemies at every border, the comfort of ordinary family life was a luxury few rulers could afford. Their unions were as much burden as blessing, a crown of thorns as well as gold. And sometimes, as in every culture where close-kin marriages prevailed, the price was paid in blood and bone. Ancient skeletons from royal tombs show signs of disease, deformity, the hidden cost of generations spent closing the circle ever tighter. Yet the stories endure. Even centuries later, when Spanish conquerors tore down the old cities and burned the books, rumors of sibling marriage among the lost lords of Mexico haunted the edges of history. The missionaries, horrified by what they heard, called it devil's work. But the logic was always the same: keep the power pure, keep the gods close, keep the world in balance. The missionaries, horrified by what they heard, called it devil's work, but the logic was always the same: keep the power pure, keep the gods close, keep the world in balance. There's a wry little joke that might have floated through a Mesoamerican marketplace. What's the one thing you can trust about the king's family? They're always on the same page, sometimes literally the same page of the family tree. And if the gods were watching, perhaps they smiled at human cleverness, or winced at the stubbornness that led mortals to mimic the heavens, no matter the cost. In time, the cities fell, the jungles crept back, and the secrets of the Toltecs and Maya faded into legend. Yet their story lingers, an echo in the stones, a sigh in the wind, a warning written in bone and blood. The kings and queens who wed their siblings did so not out of love or whim, but out of a fierce belief that only the purest could rule, only the closest could hold the world together. As you walk away from Tolin's ruins, you feel the weight of their choices, a mix of awe and sorrow. Sibling marriage for the Toltecs and Maya was both a promise and a curse, a way to touch the divine and a path toward decay. Their world may be gone, but the questions remain. How far will we go to keep what we fear to lose? What will we sacrifice for power, for order, for the illusion of eternal life? Tonight, as you drift back into the darkness, remember the kings and queens who risked everything for a place in the sun. And if your own family sometimes feels complicated, be grateful for the distance, for the freedom to love as you please, and for the wisdom to know that not every story worth telling ends with a happily ever after. Mythology is a realm of family drama dialed up to 11. Sibling rivalry becomes cosmic warfare, sibling love, a force to shape the world, and more often than you might expect, it's the union of brothers and sisters that lies at the center of creation itself. Let's draw the curtain back and peer into these mythic living rooms, where every family gathering is the first day of the world, or the last. Let's begin in Egypt, where you already know the drill. The story of Osiris and Isis is so foundational, so deeply etched into the culture, that real-life pharaohs saw their sibling marriages as a continuation of the divine blueprint. Osiris, the kindly god-king, is both brother and husband to Isis, the ultimate queen and sorceress. When he is murdered by his jealous brother Set, itself a classic family spat, if an extreme one, Isis braves the afterlife to resurrect him out of love, out of duty, and in the most iconic version, to conceive their son Horus. Every generation of Egyptian rulers saw in this myth a justification for their own unions. If it's good enough for the gods, they must have mused, surely it's good enough for us. From the mossy ruins of Mesoamerica, you glide quietly through the mists of story and time, slipping now into the shadowy borderland between history and legend. The air grows lighter, less charged with ritual, more electric with the whispers of old tales told and retold beneath hearth and moon. Tonight, you're not just paging through dusty chronicles, you're plunging into the world where gods, heroes, and mortals dance together, and where sibling marriage is spun not as a flaw, but as a model of the universe itself. Welcome to myth, legend, and justification, a realm where the strange is celebrated, where taboos are explained away by the deeds of immortals, and where humanity's deepest questions are answered with a sly, knowing smile. If Zeus can marry his sister, bade Wink, surely our dear king can marry his cousin. Myth gives cover for power, makes the forbidden seem fated, and turns the extraordinary into the expected. For all their grandeur, the tales of sibling marriage remind us of the basic human truth, that family is complicated, that love is unruly, and that the boundaries we draw are as much about keeping the world together as they are about keeping it apart. The gods may marry their sisters, mortals, meanwhile, can only watch, wonder, and choose, again and again, how much of the past they wish to bring into their own lives. The gods must be both distant and familiar, above the law and subject to it, paragons of virtue and cautionary tales all at once. By giving them family ties that blur every line, myth allows us to explain the inexplicable, why the world is broken but still beautiful, why our own families are messy but somehow endure. Again and again, the myths use family to explain the mysteries of the world. Sibling marriages among the gods are not just tolerated, they're required, a mark of power, a template for kings and queens who wish to claim a divine right. The story echoes in the Sasanian practice of cavituktus, the sibling marriages you've already encountered, a real-world custom justified, even demanded by myth. While direct brother-sister marriage isn't the central motif here, the gods' relationships blur the lines between kinship and passion, between rivalry and alliance. In the world of myth, boundaries are porous, and the family tree is always in danger of uprooting itself in the next storm. Their squabbles and reconciliations, their offspring and tantrums, fill the sky with thunder. Poseidon and Demeter, Hades and Persephone, too, are tied by both blood and affection, their unions woven into the seasons, the tides, the rhythms of the earth. The Greeks didn't necessarily advocate for sibling marriage among mortals, but by making it the norm among their gods, they gave their myths a power and weirdness that still fascinates. For every thunderbolt hurled, there's a family dinner somewhere that feels just as volatile. Tonight, you're not just paging through dusty chronicles, you're plunging into the world where gods, heroes, and mortals dance together, and where sibling marriage is spun not as a flaw, but as a model of the universe itself. Welcome to myth, legend, and justification, a realm where the strange is celebrated, where taboos are explained away by the deeds of immortals, and where humanity's deepest questions are answered with a sly, knowing smile. You drift out of the smoky tapestry of myth and legend, back into the flickering light of modernity, a world that claims to be enlightened, scientific, and rational. Yet here, too, the old shadows still lurk. The practice of sibling marriage has become taboo almost everywhere, the stories mostly whispered or hidden, yet now and then a case emerges to shock and unsettle. This is the uneasy territory of scandal, shame, and survival in modern times, a world of desperate secrets, courtroom dramas, and the silent suffering of those born into impossible choices. In most of today's world, sibling marriage is not merely frowned upon, it is condemned by law, religion, and public opinion. Science long ago revealed the genetic dangers, increased risks of birth defects, inherited illnesses, and psychological burdens that ripple through generations. Yet even as societies modernized, the ghosts of royal unions lingered. Cousin marriage persists in many places, but the line at siblings is now sharply drawn, a boundary few dare cross. But history, as always, has its rebels. Across the last 2 centuries, rare but real cases of sibling marriage or romance have surfaced, each carrying its own freight of scandal, secrecy, and heartbreak. Imagine you're in 19th century France, where the Code Napoleon has outlawed incest, and yet the countryside is full of whispered stories. In some remote villages, far from the reach of Parisian courts, brothers and sisters raised in isolation, orphans perhaps, find themselves the only family in the world. Sometimes, loneliness gives way to affection. Affection crosses the forbidden line. When discovered, the punishment is exile, imprisonment, even execution. Some couples flee, changing names and vanishing into the cities, trying to survive in the shadows. The most famous case of modern sibling marriage is that of Patrick Stubing and Susan Korolewski, siblings from Germany whose case went before the courts in the early 2000s. Separated in childhood and raised apart, they were reunited as adults, and against every social norm, fell in love, eventually having 4 children. Their relationship ignited a national debate about law, morality, and genetics. The courts ruled against them. Patrick served time in prison. Susan was placed under psychiatric care. The children, 3 of whom were disabled, became symbols for those who argue against incestuous unions. Yet for some, the case raised difficult questions about autonomy, consent, and the limits of the law in regulating love. Their relationship ignited a national debate about law, morality, and genetics. The courts ruled against them. Patrick served time in prison. Susan was placed under psychiatric care. The children, 3 of whom were disabled, became symbols for those who argue against incestuous unions. Yet for some, the case raised difficult questions about autonomy, consent, and the limits of the law in regulating love. It's tempting to treat such stories as grotesque outliers, but dig a little deeper, and you find a landscape of hidden pain. In places where family structures are destroyed by war, poverty, or disaster, siblings sometimes become all each other has. The line between protection and intimacy can blur, especially when society offers little support. Psychologists call it genetic sexual attraction, a phenomenon where siblings separated at birth feel a powerful, sometimes sexual bond upon meeting as adults. For most, this ends in confusion and withdrawal. For a few, it leads to relationships that can never be spoken of aloud. Court records from the 20th century in the United States, the UK, Australia, and beyond are dotted with such cases, always shrouded in shame, always ending in tragedy or forced separation. The public response is, almost universally, horror. Tabloid headlines scream, incest shock as families are destroyed, children removed from their parents, lives shattered by a love that in another context might simply be called devotion. The law, for the most part, is inflexible. In nearly every country, sexual relationships between siblings are criminalized, punishable by prison or forced psychiatric treatment. The justification is not just morality, but public health. The risk of genetic defects in children is seen as too great, the taboo too powerful to allow exceptions. Yet, there are exceptions. In a handful of countries, France for example, consensual incest between adults is not technically a crime, though it remains deeply stigmatized and rarely acknowledged. In Japan, laws have changed over time. In Brazil, incestuous unions have occasionally been recognized in isolated rural communities, especially in places where migration and displacement have broken all other family ties. But the real story of sibling marriage in the modern world is not about crime or scandal. It is about silence. Most who find themselves drawn to a brother or sister simply bury the feeling, cut off contact, or suffer in secret. Those who dare to act risk losing everything: family, freedom, even their sense of self. Behind the legal drama lies a quieter tragedy: the children of sibling unions. In rare cases where such relationships produce offspring, the children bear the brunt of public scorn and sometimes of genetic misfortune. Medical journals document higher rates of congenital illness, learning disabilities, and physical malformations, painful proof of the wisdom behind the old taboos. Still, not all stories end in disaster. In some cases, siblings who defy the law find support in unexpected places: a compassionate judge, a sympathetic social worker, an online community of others living with the same forbidden feelings. In the age of the internet, people can find each other, share stories, even organize for legal reform, though always behind closed doors, always with the knowledge that exposure means ruin. You may wonder, why does sibling marriage persist, even now, in a world that knows so much and judges so harshly? The answer is complicated. A tangle of psychology, circumstance, and human need. Sometimes it's the legacy of abuse or neglect. Sometimes it's the result of long separation, or of growing up as the only two people who truly understand each other. For a few, it is simply love in its strangest form. Perhaps the most haunting element of these modern tales is their loneliness. Unlike the ancient queens and kings, who could cloak their marriages in ritual and myth, today's couples have no shield but secrecy. They must live double lives, denying themselves the comfort of honesty, always fearing discovery. Even when they part, the memory remains, a wound that never quite heals. Let's pause for a moment of dark humor, because even in the grimmest tales, humans find ways to laugh. There's an old saying in some rural communities, keep it in the family, but not that close. Or the therapist who, upon hearing a confession, can only respond, well, that's complicated. Jokes are a way to distance ourselves, to make the unthinkable manageable, even as the reality is never quite so simple. In recent years, the conversation has shifted, just a little. Bioethicists debate the limits of consent, the meaning of autonomy. Some argue that if both siblings are adults, if no coercion or abuse is present, the law should not interfere. Others insist that the risks to children, to the fabric of society, are too great to ignore. The debate is often academic, but for those living the reality, it is life and death. Others insist that the risks to children, to the fabric of society, are too great to ignore. The debate is often academic, but for those living the reality, it is life and death. Still, for every rare case that makes the news, there are hundreds more that never will. Siblings who love and lose, who hide and survive, who carry their secret as both burden and comfort. For most, the best they can hope for is peace, a quiet life, free from exposure, free from shame. Tonight, as you slip into sleep, you might think of those whose love crosses the last forbidden line. Some are victims, some are rebels, some are simply lost. Their stories, so different from the grandeur of pharaohs or the legends of gods, are a reminder that the human heart is stubborn, unruly, and often incapable of obeying the rules laid down by kings, priests, or scientists. As the world grows more open, more curious, more compassionate, perhaps someday even these stories will find their place. Not celebrated, perhaps, but understood. Until then, they remain in the shadows. Scandals for some, survival for others, and for all of us. A mirror reflecting the tangled depths of family and love. The shadows of modern shame and secrecy settle behind you as you wander into a brighter, sharper place. The world of science and consequence, where microscopes, charts, and careful studies replace myths and palace gossip. Here, we seek the truth, not in legend but in genetics, not in stories but in the cold, clinical light of inheritance. Tonight you step into the vast laboratory of science, genetics, and consequence, to finally ask, what really happens when sibling marriage is repeated, century after century? What are the hidden costs that shaped minds, bodies, empires, and even the very course of history itself? You're probably familiar with the old warnings. Don't marry your cousin, let alone your sister. You'll have children with 3 eyes and 12 toes. For all their exaggeration, such warnings rest on very real science. A science whose lessons echo through the stories you've already heard, from Tutankhamun's clubbed foot to the Habsburg jaw. Let's begin with the basics. Every person carries 2 sets of chromosomes, one from each parent. Each chromosome contains genes, recipes for everything from your eye color to your risk of heart disease. In healthy populations, Those recipes are shuffled every generation, mixing and remixing to produce the infinite variety of humanity. But when people who are closely related, especially siblings, have children, those shuffles get fewer and fewer. The odds that a child will inherit 2 copies of the same harmful gene go up dramatically. This is called inbreeding, and its effects can be both subtle and catastrophic. The more closely related the parents, the higher the risk that recessive genetic disorders hidden in the family for generations will suddenly appear. With each generation, the risk compounds, stacking the deck against health, longevity, and sometimes sanity. In history, the toll of sibling marriage and its close cousin-cousin marriage can be read in the bodies and minds of rulers. Take the Egyptian pharaohs. Studies of royal mummies, from Tutankhamun to his ancestors, reveal a litany of ailments: clubbed feet, cleft palates, scoliosis, malaria, and mysterious early deaths. Tutankhamun, the boy king, is a classic example. Born to parents who were almost certainly siblings, he suffered from a clubbed left foot, a severely weakened immune system, and possibly a bone disorder called Kola disease. His early death at about 18 is thought to be due, at least in part, to the genetic lottery stacked against him by centuries of close kin marriage. Move forward to the Habsburgs of Europe, and the warning signs become almost cartoonish. The famous Habsburg jaw, a severe underbite, mandibular prognathism, so pronounced that some royals could not close their mouths properly, was just one symptom. The Spanish Habsburgs in particular were so inbred that their coefficient of inbreeding, a number used by geneticists to measure how closely related someone's parents are, rivaled that of the offspring of full siblings. Charles II of Spain, the last of his line, was physically and mentally disabled, infertile, and plagued by mysterious illnesses. He died without an heir, ending one of Europe's most powerful dynasties, not with a bang, but with a genetic whimper. But it's not just about bones and faces. Inbreeding increases the risk for a host of disorders: hemophilia, bleeding disorder, cystic fibrosis, albinism, immune deficiencies, and a long list of neurological conditions. Some, like hemophilia in the royal houses of Russia and Britain, shaped world events. The Romanov dynasty's desperation to cure Alexei, their hemophiliac heir, led to the rise of Rasputin, whose influence would help topple the Tsar. For every famous name, there are countless unnamed royal siblings who died in infancy, princes and princesses who were hidden away, queens who struggled to bear healthy heirs. Sometimes the signs were subtle: a chronic weakness, a nervous disposition, a mind not quite right. Other times the signs were impossible to ignore: madness, deformity, death. The science is clear. With every generation of close-kin marriage, the risk rises. Children of first cousins are about twice as likely as unrelated couples' children to have a serious genetic disorder. For siblings, the risk can be 8 to 10 times higher. In the ancient and medieval world, without modern medicine, such risks meant not just tragedy for families, but disaster for empires. A sickly heir could spark wars of succession, as rivals jostled for power. An infertile queen could doom a dynasty. A mad king could plunge a nation into chaos. But genetics doesn't just punish the individual, it shapes entire societies. Think about the logic behind sibling marriage: a desire to keep power, wealth, and purity inside the family. It's a short-term gain, but a long-term loss. Over generations, the genetic pool narrows, weaknesses accumulate, and the family becomes ever more vulnerable to disaster. History's most spectacular collapses are often traced in part to this phenomenon. Egypt's new kingdom, glorious in its day, fell into decline as the royal line became more and more inbred, unable to withstand the combined pressures of internal strife, foreign invasion, and poor health. Yet for all the warnings, the practice persisted. Why? Because the rewards were immediate and obvious: a clear line of succession, concentrated wealth, loyalty guaranteed by blood. The dangers, by contrast, were slow and silent, building over decades or centuries, and for much of history, the science simply wasn't known. It wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries that genetics, thanks to researchers like Gregor Mendel, himself an Austrian monk, unlocked the code. Suddenly, the patterns that had haunted families for generations made sense. Doctors and scientists could explain in detail how inbreeding led to disease and how even a single cousin marriage could echo through a family tree for centuries. In today's world, the lessons are both scientific and moral. Most societies ban sibling marriage outright, not just to avoid the risk of genetic disease, but to protect the integrity of family life. Bioethics debates these questions fiercely. Should the state intervene in the private lives of consenting adults? Is it the government's role to prevent marriages that might produce sick children? Or should individual autonomy win out? In the rare modern cases where sibling couples have fought for their right to marry, courts almost always come down on the side of prohibition, citing public health, morality, and the welfare of future children. Meanwhile, genetic counseling has become an essential service for families with a history of cousin or sibling marriage. In parts of the world where cousin marriage is still common, doctors encourage couples to check for recessive diseases before having children. For sibling marriage, the answer is usually stark: don't do it. But science, for all its clarity, cannot erase the stories, the tragedy, the hope, the sometimes desperate desire to defy fate. For some, the urge to keep the family line pure is irresistible, whether for cultural, religious, or emotional reasons. For others, it is a legacy of trauma, of isolation, of lives shaped by circumstances few can imagine. In the end, the lessons of genetics reinforce what history and myth have always hinted: that family is both a blessing and a curse, a source of strength and sometimes of suffering. The stories of pharaohs and emperors are more than gossip. They are case studies in the costs of ignoring the warnings written into our very DNA. Let's end with a little humour, because if the science makes your head spin, maybe laughter is the best medicine. There's an old royal joke: why did the Habsburgs keep marrying their cousins? Because no one else would put up with their dinner conversation. Or the Egyptian scribe sighing as he writes another marriage contract. At this point, the family tree is just a very confused shrub. You close your eyes thinking of the lessons carved in stone and bone, written in genes and dreams. The story of sibling marriage is, in the end, a story about limits, about what happens when power, love, and legacy are bound too tightly. Science has given us the tools to understand the risks, but the old allure remains, a whisper from the past urging us to remember both the price and the promise of family. Tonight, as you drift off, you carry with you the wisdom of ages, that our choices echo not just in our own lives, but in those of our children, our grandchildren, and all who come after. The past is never really gone. It's written in our blood, waiting for the future to read. The echo of scientific warnings settles into your bones as you lie there, feeling the hush of centuries and the weight of choices made long before you ever breathed. But not every story is a tale of surrender. Sometimes, history is interrupted by the quiet bravery of those who, against all odds, against the full pressure of family and fate, simply say no. This is the chapter of the quiet rebellion. Siblings who refused a winding path through palace corridors, whispered conversations, secret meetings in moonlit gardens, and the rare radiant courage to defy a lineage built on marrying your own kin. The myth of inevitability, that siblings had no choice but to wed, is just that, a myth. Throughout history, every custom, no matter how mighty or ancient, has met its rebels, the sisters and brothers who found a way out, who risked disgrace, exile, or worse, for the sake of a different life. Sometimes their stories are lost, scrubbed from the record by victors eager to display only perfect obedience. But if you listen carefully, you can still hear their footsteps, their whispers of refusal, echoing through the long halls of royal memory. Imagine the first girl who ever refused. Her name is forgotten, but her moment of hesitation is not. Maybe it was in ancient Egypt, under the burnished gold of a palace dawn. The princess, barely more than a child, is told she will be married to her older brother, a boy she once raced in the gardens, who now seems more stranger than kin. One night, as the river whispers outside, she sneaks away to the women's quarters and pours out her dread to her mother, or a loyal nursemaid, or perhaps only the moon. What can she do? The answer is usually silence, sometimes a slap, but every so often a plan. Maybe a sympathetic priest helps, falsifying omens. Maybe an uncle arranges a match with a cousin instead. Maybe she's sent to a temple as a bride of the god, her chastity an escape hatch disguised as piety. Such refusals didn't topple dynasties overnight, but each planted a seed of possibility. Every time a royal sibling said no loudly or quietly, publicly or in whispers, the world shifted a little. Sometimes the refusal ended in tragedy. The rebellious princess locked away, the brother exiled, the family racked by scandal. Sometimes, though, it ended with quiet success. The unwanted union avoided, a new tradition begun, the chain broken for a single blessed generation. In medieval Europe, where cousin and sibling marriages were less openly embraced but always lurking in the background, refusal sometimes came cloaked in religion. Ambitious sisters, facing the prospect of a politically expedient but unwanted union, would seek sanctuary in a convent. Cloistered behind stone walls, they became nuns or even abbesses, wielding a different kind of power, one rooted in faith, scholarship, and community rather than family politics. Their letters home, when they survive, often strike a note of bittersweet relief. "I am safe here at last." One abbess writes in the 12th century, "My heart unburdened, my soul my own." Even in cultures where family was everything, and obedience was the highest virtue, cracks could be found. In Ming and Qing China, the emperor's sisters and daughters sometimes managed to evade prescribed marriages by feigning illness, feigning madness, or in rare cases, falling in love with someone too lowly to be considered a proper match. Their stories became court legends, some ending happily, some not, all treasured by later generations who dreamed of a different kind of freedom. Not all rebellion was solitary. Sometimes siblings plotted together, forging pacts to outwit the elders. In ancient Hawaii, where the highest-ranking chiefs married their sisters to keep mana pure, legends speak of a brother and sister who refused, who ran away to live as commoners, their royal lineage forgotten in the green folds of a distant valley. The priests called it sacrilege, but the people, those who heard the tale in song and story, sometimes called it courage. Occasionally, the rebellion was quieter still. A royal sibling, faced with the demand to marry, would simply refuse to consummate the union. This passive resistance could have enormous consequences. No heir, no line, the dynasty thrown into confusion. Sometimes it led to annulment, sometimes to quiet arrangement. One or both partners permitted to take lovers, the marriage maintained only on paper. For historians, these blank spaces in the record are tantalizing. Why did this queen have no children? Why did this prince spend his nights in the company of his hunting dogs and falcons rather than his royal wife-sister? The answer, more often than not, is resistance, a gentle but unbreakable no. One particularly striking story comes from the court of the Ptolemies. Not all of Cleopatra's sisters were as willing to play the family game. Arsinoe IV, Cleopatra's younger sister, resisted the forced alliances of her dynasty. When her siblings tried to manipulate her into dangerous marriages for their own political gain, she rebelled, raising troops, seizing the Temple of Artemis, and ultimately fighting her sister for control of Egypt. Her end was tragic. Cleopatra had her executed in the sanctuary, but for a time, Arsinoe's refusal rattled the palace to its foundations. She remains, even now, a symbol of resistance, a royal who risked everything for a different future. In the annals of the Incas, too, there are hints of rebellion. Some sister queens fled the imperial court, vanishing into the Andean highlands. Their descendants, it's said, live quietly in mountain villages, their ancient blood mixing with the wider world. The story of their escape whispered only among trusted kin. Modern times bring their own quiet rebels. In the rare instances where siblings today discover they are expected or pressured to marry, most simply walk away. Legal protections now make refusal the default, but the emotional courage to resist family, culture, or religion still takes its toll. Support groups, counseling, and online communities offer sanctuary for those who struggle to say no, a soft landing for hearts that might otherwise break. In every era, refusal is rarely rewarded. Rebels are scorned, ostracized, or worse, but their courage leaves a mark. A thin gold thread of possibility running through the tapestry of history. Their stories are less likely to be recorded in marble or gold, but they persist in lullabies sung by hopeful mothers, in secret diaries, in the quiet pride of descendants who know that Just once their ancestors chose another way. Let's add a gentle laugh here, for sometimes rebellion, like love, is its own best joke. Why didn't the princess marry her brother? She said she'd rather kiss a frog, and at least the frog doesn't expect an heir. Or the courtier who after another marriage announcement murmured, maybe the family tree needs a few new branches, not just circles. Even in the stoniest of palaces, laughter can be a weapon, a way to make the impossible feel for a moment like something you might survive. Perhaps the truest victory of these quiet rebels is not that they ended a practice forever, but that they proved it could be ended. Every no makes the next one easier. Every sister who escapes gives hope to others. And so, over centuries, what was once destiny becomes a choice. A slow, patient revolution. As you lie here tonight, let yourself rest in the memory of those who walked away from the old order. They were not always celebrated. Often, their lives were lonely, even short. But with every step taken in defiance, they drew the world a little wider, a little kinder. Thanks to them, your own family tree is less likely to be a noose and more likely to be a place where love, not duty, makes the final choice. The quiet rebellion of siblings who refused is a reminder that history is made not just by kings and queens who obey, but by the ordinary, stubborn courage of those who say, gently but firmly, I want something else. Their stories, though rare, are bright beacons in the long night, proof that even the strongest chains can break, even the oldest curses can end. So you arrive at the last hall in this endless palace, a place heavy with the scent of old candles and the weight of unspoken stories. Here, as the night deepens, we look not at rulers or rebels, but at lasting shadows, how the world remembers the afterlife of sibling marriage in history's memory, its echo in lore, culture, rumour, and the quiet unease that still lingers in family gatherings and bedtime tales. Perhaps you thought this strange tradition would simply vanish when the last royal tomb was sealed, when the last crown slipped from a tired brow, but nothing woven so deeply into the fabric of power, myth, and family ever truly disappears. The marriages of royal siblings, with all their grandeur and horror, live on, transformed, sometimes disguised, sometimes hauntingly clear, but always there beneath the surface. In museums and textbooks, the stories are presented with a clinical detachment. It was custom, it was necessary, it was a product of its time. You can almost hear the tour guide's voice. Pharaohs married sisters to keep their line divine. Inca emperors wed their koya for the sun god's blessing. The Habsburg jaw was the result of a few too many close-knit unions. But step away from the glass cases, the neat timelines and the passive verbs, and you find something messier. A legacy that tugs at the imagination, that complicates the very idea of family, love, and power. For one thing, the aftertaste of sibling marriage remains in law. In most of the world, it is strictly forbidden, an echo of ancient horror at what was once normal. Judges, lawmakers, and teachers invoke the risk of degeneration, the need to keep families healthy, but underneath, you sense a deeper anxiety, the fear that old ways might return, that the blood of kings and queens might still whisper its secrets in the dark. Even in places where cousin marriage is legal or accepted, the line at siblings is held firm, a boundary as old as civilization itself. And yet, the fascination lingers. Books, films, and TV dramas return again and again to the theme of forbidden family love, from Shakespeare's Hamlet to modern shows like Game of Thrones. The idea of incest, especially between powerful siblings, is used as a shorthand for ambition, arrogance, and the dangers of unchecked power. In every retelling, there's a mix of awe and revulsion, a sense that sibling marriage is both the ultimate transgression and the deepest secret of dynasties. The phrase keeping it in the family carries a chill, a hint of something not quite said, not quite forgotten. In some places, the shadow is more subtle. Royal families, even after losing their thrones, remain careful about marriages, choosing partners from a narrow circle, keeping wealth and influence tightly controlled. Aristocratic lineages still value pedigree, still boast of pure blood, even if the practice of actual sibling marriage has faded into the past. The lessons of history, genetic illness, madness, tragedy, are acknowledged with a shrug, then overruled by tradition or ambition. But for most, the legacy is one of taboo, a line not to be crossed. Parents warn children, communities police relationships, and the rare cases that do arise become the stuff of scandal and debate. Sibling marriage has become the ultimate example of the forbidden, a boundary that defines what it means to be civilized, rational, modern. In this way, the old dynasties did their work too well. By making sibling marriage a tool of power, they guaranteed its place as a symbol of everything society must resist. Yet, as you settle into the softness of this final hour, you may wonder, what else do we inherit from these ancient unions, besides the cautionary tales? For one, the idea that families are both our greatest strength and our greatest vulnerability. The old kings and queens, in their desperate attempts to keep power close, remind us of the dangers of turning inward, of mistaking loyalty for love, of confusing blood with destiny. Their stories urge us to seek balance between tradition and change, between belonging and freedom. There is also, quietly, a strange compassion. To look honestly at history's most twisted marriages is to see not just monsters and fools, but people, lonely, frightened, sometimes trapped by duty, sometimes defiant. You sense the pain in Ankhesenamun's gaze, the longing in Nefertiti's silhouette, the weariness in Charles II's twisted jaw. Their lives are warnings, yes, but also pleas to break the cycle, to choose kindness, to let the past be past. Even now, families everywhere grapple with their own legacies, expectations, burdens, old resentments that stretch back farther than anyone can remember. The details may change, but the pattern endures. The real lesson of sibling marriage is not never marry your sister. That's easy enough for most. It's don't let fear or tradition or the hunger for power shrink your world. Let your family tree have branches, not just circles. Let your story be one of possibility, not repetition. In the end, the shadow of sibling marriage fades not with a bang but a sigh. It becomes myth, then memory, then little more than a question in a history class or a shiver in a late-night tale. But the questions it raises about family, power, freedom, and the cost of keeping things too close still matter, still echo in every heart that has ever felt both the comfort and the constraint of belonging. So tonight, as the candles gutter low and the stars stretch wide across the sky, you leave this labyrinth with more questions than answers, but with a gentler heart for all the strange, sad, stubborn people who shaped history with their choices. Let your breath ease now. The tangled branches of history grow soft in the distance, their shapes blurring as dawn approaches. You've wandered through gilded palaces and jungle temples, shadowed courts and lonely cellars, listening to the hush of lives shaped by laws, legends, and longing. The stories of sibling marriage, their grandeur, their tragedy, their lasting shadows, slowly settle around you like old dust, no longer sharp, no longer strange, just part of the distant landscape. Your body feels heavy, your thoughts drifting, your heart no longer racing at the strangeness of kings and queens who called their siblings both family and fate. Instead, you sense a gentle hush, a sense that history, for all its wildness, is only human after all. You remember faces behind the legends, a sister glancing at her brother with uncertainty, a prince looking at the horizon, hoping for another way, a queen with a secret smile, her rebellion hidden in the quiet choice not to follow an ancient rule. Every family has its stories, its rules, its blessings, and its burdens. The old dynasties, so far from your own life, are closer than you think, not because of what they did, but because of what they felt: fear, hope, love, and the deep wish for a future both safe and free. Their mistakes and miracles are stitched into the long night, a comfort and a warning, a story told to help you rest. Let your shoulders relax, your jaw unclench. The candlelight in these old halls has burned low, but outside, the dawn is gentle, patient. You are safe, and you are enough. Just as you are, no thrones to guard, no curses to break, only the soft unfolding of your own quiet dreams. Sweet dreams, my dearest timeless sleep community.